Hello, welcome to the next series in MP6062, Lectures on Research Methods. Today we're going to look at the nature of qualitative research. Some may decide not to adopt this methodology and may decide to use a quantitative approach. Though there may be instances where in your research you may decide to delve deeper into the responses given by individuals. And here you can adopt what we call a qualitative approach to your research and mixing it with quantitative. So this is actually possible where you can have what we call a mixed methods, both quantitative and qualitative. And you may have a quantitative directed mixed method or a qualitative directed mixed method approach, depending on which one you use more. So what are the features of a qualitative research? It's what we call inductive view of relationships between theory and research. So what's quite important here is that in qualitative research, the theories and concepts emerge from the data. So in a sense, you are developing theory or concepts as a result of your study. Whereby in quantitative, you may actually be testing theory. So in your qualitative approach, you're theory building. The other feature is an interpretivist epistemology. The goal of the interpretivist research is to understand and interpret human behavior rather than the generalization of the behavior and rather than the prediction of cause and effect relationships. In qualitative research, the emphasis is very much so on words and texts rather than numbers. So in your write-up, in a qualitative research approach, the reader would be more inclined to read body of text or quotations or interpretations of the observations made rather than statistics. Another feature of qualitative research is the diversity of approaches, and that leads on to the next slide. Well, what methods or approaches are available to use? Ethnography or participation observation. This is a prolonged immersion in the field, and what I think straight away of is Gorillas in the Mist. She got herself involved in the community, yes, of gorillas, but she participated, observed, and made recommendations and observations and theories as a result of that immersion in the field. What you may do more so for your thesis, which is worth 24 ECTS credits, is more the qualitative interviewing, where you may do in-depth, semi or unstructured interviews. You may decide to do focus groups, which we will discuss in a while. Discourse or conversation analysis. This is where you try to develop approaches to analysing the data based on vocal, sign language, written, or any significant semiotic event. Or you may do documentary analysis, so analysing documents from a previous, say, 10, 15 years, and analyse the thoughts or the discursive nature and elements of that period of time of analysis. What are the main preoccupations of qualitative research? Well, here you're seeing through the eyes of those studies. So in a sense, going back to ethnography, you're immersing yourself in the research. So here you're taking on the role of others. You start to understand the meaning that people attribute to their world. You may have unexpected findings. There's a description and emphasis on context. So from your immersion or observation or from the analysis of the commentary, you're able to give a more detailed account of something. more explanation, more descriptives on the actual setting or surroundings or the participants. Again, remember, going back to what qualitative research is more about, it's about the behaviours. So here there's the emphasis on the social process, on how patterns of events unfold over time. And that can actually be observed even through the documentary analysis. The social world's characterised by change and flux. So seeing patterns emerge over a period of time, or even changes to those patterns, that is done through the qualitative approach. Researchers have identified that it's enabling flexibility and limited structure, in that there's no contamination by rigid schedules, and also, in a sense, your research is completely unstructured. Day in, day out can be different. Different events cause different questions or different things to emerge. And again, in a sense, the output is that the concepts and theory is then grounded in the data that you have actually gathered. There are, though, criticisms of qualitative research. And the first one you need to take on board, because in a sense it can be too subjective, in that it is very much dependent on what the researcher decides to focus on. It is difficult to replicate unless you have the individual who conducted the research right beside you, informing you constantly. But even those nuances that that individual had or displayed or experienced can be hard to replicate. The problem of generalization, in that you cannot take one sample and then say that that actually truly reflects the population. It is hard to generalize. And oftentimes it is very difficult to know what the researcher actually did. Most research will be written up based on the interpretation from the research, and you would not have the full opportunity to observe the steps involved that the researcher took on board. This leads on actually quite nicely into what steps can be taken in qualitative research. Well, firstly, you have the generalization of a research question. Again, remember, you aren't grounded in theory from the beginning. It's actually at the end you're grounded in theory. So qualitative research is going out to generate more the theory. So you have to start with generalizations. Then you need to say, where would this question be applied? In what setting? In what location? In what environment? And to whom are you going to apply the question to? Then you immerse yourself, or you gather the documents and you observe those documents and interact with those documents. Then there is the interpretation of the data. And remember, this is where it can be quite subjective. You then develop, in a sense, as concepts and the theory as a result of the data collected and analysed. Now, at this stage, you have a two-pronged direction. You can either write up your findings and conclusions as a result of the data gathered and then the theory or the concepts emerging from that data, or you might decide to actually go and gather more data on the basis of a tighter research question rather than one that was general. So based on O'Dwyer, who has conducted an awful lot of qualitative research, she identifies the following as a structure of a qualitative thesis or report, which can be quite different to the structure of a quantitative report. So chapter 1, or in a report you may do section 1, is an introduction. You have a literature review. You explain the methodology adopted, going back to the previous slide, in a sense showing the identification of the site or location or the subjects. and explaining the qualitative approach that you took, be it ethnographic, discourse analysis, focus groups, qualitative interviewing, or documentary analysis. Then it's recommended that you do a case-by-case analysis. So you have single cases explained in the next chapter, the presentation of the data here. And then your next chapter presents the cross-case analysis, looking at the themes that emerge, or even the concepts. And then your discussion and conclusion presents, in a sense, the concepts and the theory that emerges as a result of this analysis. So with the case method, one of the primary strengths of this is its application to SMEs. And there's multiple uses that you can have with the case method, and that could be interviews, direct observation, document analysis, archival research, participation in the organization itself, or looking at the physical artifacts of the SME. All of those are elements of qualitative research method that can actually be all intertwined in your discussion, in your case write-up. As I say in the next point, it enables converging lines of inquiry based on historical, attitudinal or behavioural issues. And they could be the themes that actually emerge in the analysis of your case. You can write a single case, and it could also be multiple cases. So if it's a single case, there wouldn't necessarily be a cross-case analysis chapter. It would be there a discussion in the development of the themes, concepts and theory. In the multiple cases, yes, you would have a cross-case analysis. So the next slide is looking at a 4-stage interactive research process, and it's proposed by Miles and Huberman, 1994, which is based on data collection, data reduction, data display, and conclusion and drawing and verifying the data. So in a sense, that's the stage in gathering your qualitative research. When you're collecting data, you don't make a decision at that particular time on discarding any information. Gather all the information that you can get, going back to the archival research, the physical artifacts, all of that. And then once it is completed, reduce the data down. And then look at how it actually is presented, and then from that draw conclusions and observations. A qualitative data analysis software program is called NVivo, and the library has a copy of this software which can actually be put on your computer system. And primarily NVivo actually contains the analysis tools of trying to identify throughout all your documents common themes that emerge, or common phrases or common words, and it presents it in trees of research. So what results can you expect as a result of doing qualitative research? It could be confirmation of a research question. It could be also conversely the disconfirmation. Or it could have an emerging theory. Now obviously the theory cannot be grounded as being definitive until you do further research. But even you may have an emergent theory that can be further examined. So the next couple of slides looks at some of these methods, and one of them is the interview, and what is the interview and how we can gather information from an interview. So an interview protocol, you can have a general open-ended inductive or deductive interview topics. What is recommended is that the first interview question should be open-ended and almost content and jargon free. This can enable the interviewee to be more relaxed, to feel in control, and to start to enjoy the process. So how can we maximize the value of in-depth interviews? The following points should benefit you. Use non-academic, non-jargon language. Put yourselves into the shoes of others who may not understand the terms that you use. It should be the respondent or the interviewee who should dictate the order of topic discussion. That enables flow, it enables freedom, it enables the continuance of information being disclosed to you. So enable uninterrupted dialogue and discussion. Remain detached. Do not look shocked or surprised or frown or anything like that. However, maintain eye contact with the interviewee. Do not use leading questions, but maybe ask for clarification or explanation if something is unclear. Never evaluate answers in the interview. We can do that later on in the data reduction. Always people ask me, well, how many interviews do I actually need to do? And there's different opinions and numbers and figures out there. For example, Goulding 1998 found that depending on the topic, most studies achieve saturation between 8 and 24 interviews. Carson et al. Suggests that 30 or so interviews are required to provide a credible picture in a reasonably sized research project. But I have to go back to saying depending on the topic. Here I would suggest you interact with your supervisor and get guidance from them. Because another researcher, Eisenhardt, actually says around 8 interviews would be sufficient. The next thing to question is, do we record? Some respondents simply do not like any form of recording to be used. Yes, they will allow or enable notes to be taken, but not their voice to be recorded. And research has actually found that that little recorder can actually prohibit people from being open and providing more content and more context to the discussion. So it can be much richer and meaningful without audio recording. I need to go back to your research ethics form. If in your research ethics form you indicate that no recording will be made, well then there is the understanding that you will not have a physical recording of the document or, of the conversation. The other type of qualitative approach that you can adopt is observation. And it can be human, overt, or natural. And it can be observed in their natural physical environment. I remember doing this myself with a notebook and pad at the side of a shopping aisle, watching people interact with a product that a client asked me to observe people's interaction with. I wasn't overt. I actually had a pinafore on saying observer in place. This was in America when I was doing this. And it said observer in place. So, you know, it was very obvious that people were observing others. The natural environment, going back to Gorillas in the Mist, which is an amazing film about somebody observing and interacting and part of a society and becoming part of a society. So at the end of the day, what is the outcome as a result of qualitative research? Well, from the literature review, a conceptual model can emerge. And these elements are explored in light of the research objectives, which are addressed in terms of the criteria for analysis. So the criteria for analysis ends up to be the guide for you in order to analyze your case. They're there to help you to actually facilitate the emergence of additional concepts. But you have to know what the criteria for analysis are, and it is those criteria that help to inform your research question. So what are the similarities and maybe differences between quantitative and qualitative research? Well, the differences are quite obvious. In quantitative, we're dealing with numbers. In qualitative, we're dealing with words. In quantitative, we're testing theory. In qualitative, theory emerges. Quantitative, it is more the macro perspective, and we can say very much that it is representative of the population, whereby in qualitative it is a macro analysis, a small subsection of an overall population, which we cannot actually necessarily say is indicative of that population. There are some similarities between quantitative and qualitative research, and they're outlined here. There's a number of concerns with answering research questions. Both will have to have a research question. However, one is more general than the other. The qualitative research question is the general one. The concern with relating data analysis to the research literature. We need to engage the literature in both contexts, and then, in a sense, try to analyse our own data that we analysed or that we developed with the literature. But in the end, one tests the theory, the other theory emerges. The appropriateness of research methods to questions, that's always got to be considered in both quantitative and qualitative research. In a sense, qualitative research is action research, and here we're basically, in a sense, applying a research problem in an organizational context, experimenting with that problem in the organization, and then trying to provide a solution. Action research has to have a problem identified. You have to plan how to actually solve that problem, do an action, and then have evaluation. The outcome of good and effective action research is it should have implications that relate to situations other than the ones studied. That's a good and effective action research, that even though it's on a micro basis, it still has application to others. It should be concerned with theory, be it the emergence of theory or the identification of a completely new theory altogether. Action research, qualitative research, leads to the generation of emergent or grounded theory which emanates from the data in gradual incremental steps. Again, Bryman and Bell, in their qualitative section in their research methods book, has some excellent content on how to do a grounded study, how to conduct qualitative research, how to also use in vivo as well. Finally, the outcome of good and effective action research is that you as a researcher must recognise that your findings have practical implications. And you need to have, in a sense, directions for the reader or the organisation or the SME that you conducted the research on, that they actually have steps to take away from the research. And finally, cognitive mapping. This is a method used within qualitative research, and it's used widely by management and business researchers. It can be used as a problem-solving device, commonly used as a management consulting technique. It's a tool for reflective thinking about a problem that then enables steps to be taken towards its solution. And it relates to the thinking process of individuals, groups, organizations, or even industries. What does a cognitive map look like? And this is the last slide in the nature of qualitative research. So the last slide shows that the interviewer tape records the interview rather than taking notes. The interview maintains an impression of actively listening to interviewee, maintaining eye contact and showing interest in what he or she is saying. The interviewee feels positive towards the interviewer and about the process of being interviewed. Basically, the outcome is a tape recording which is of a quality that is suitable for transcription for subsequent analysis. So in a sense, you're showing the whole process here of the recording of the interview and the environment that is needed for a proper approach to be taken for a qualitative interview. You need to use the language that is relevant and understood by the interviewee. The tape recording needs to be done in an environment that is quiet, that is private, that there's flexibility in the interview questioning, but mainly directed by the interviewee, and there's spontaneity and openness by the interviewee. I hope this has helped you to understand the nature of qualitative research, and we will be looking at a number of the approaches to qualitative interviews in section 4, where we will look at focus groups, looking at documentary analysis, looking at interviewing, and also other methods as well. Thank you very much. Goodbye.